Next question is for Sherry. Sherry, if we begin to build self-esteem and an understanding of healthy body image in young girls between 7, 8, and 9 years old, which empowers them to embrace their uniqueness based on who they are, not what they look like, then the next generation may be less likely to use appearance as their main measure of worth. Could you comment on this?
It sounds like a great theory, and I really look forward to seeing it in practice. And, it makes sense. I don't have the clinical research background that Dr. Jerry does, and I was very interested in her comments about how self-reporting is a dangerous indicator vis-a-vis feminism. But it certainly seems to make sense to me, and again, to jive with the research that is out there. And it also seems to me that, when you look at the populations of young girls who are, for example, very engaged in music or sports, and I mean sports that don't have an aesthetic element, so not gymnastics, for example, or diving, but grass hockey or soccer. If you look at girls who, at a young age, are very defined in terms of their sense of identity with doing rather than appearing. I suspect that there is a parallel there between their outcomes and the proposition that's being made in the question.
Great, thank you so much. Our next question is for Janet. Janet, Helga Dittmar's research in the UK shows that women were as inclined to purchase a product where an average-sized model advertised it as that with a thin model. What would you say is the roadblock to advertisers taking this route, given the negative impact of thin models or thin images?
Sorry, can you repeat that a little bit? I just have so much feedback in my headphones I couldn't hear you properly.
Sure, that's fine. Helga Dittmar's research in the UK shows that women were as inclined to purchase a product where an average-size model advertised it as that with a thin model. What would you say is the roadblock to advertisers taking this route, given the negative impact of thin images?
I think that I haven't seen that research, and I'm not 100% convinced of it, because I'd say that there's evidence that it doesn't always go that way. But in general, advertising historically, and I think it's changing, but historically advertising has been about creating the fantasy. It's been about creating the slightly, the whitest whites, the thing that's maybe just slightly out of reach that you want to have yourself and you want to aspire to. And everything is portrayed in a shinier, more perfect way than it ever could be in anybody's life, and in theory we all want that more perfect life. So that's how things have historically been. I think the notion of people choosing to buy things where they see people who are more like themselves is a relatively new thing. And if it's really being borne out, I'm thrilled. And people are starting slowly to go there. But nobody's giving up on the fantasies either. Certainly the L'Oreals and the Lancomes and all of those people aren't hurting, and the fashion designers aren't hurting for the images they show. So I don't think they have the impetus to do it. In many cases, they see themselves as artists, especially the designers, and they don't really want to be told what to do. They want to lead, not follow. And I think this is a change that, if they took that step, would make them a leader in a different way, but not all of them are there at this point.
Hello, I'm sorry, I'm not sure if my mic was on when I asked that last question. I'm going to try again. This question is for any one of our panelists. What must we teach young people so that they can deconstruct what they see in the media?
I'm happy to start on that. I think for starters, it's really useful for young people to understand how media operate in a sort of global sense, so the commercial basis of media, which in turn helps them to understand that the images and the messages, the programming itself that they're consuming is ultimately, if not about selling them something specifically, it's about engaging them for long enough that they will also be exposed to the advertising. So it's useful for them just to understand that media are there to engage and entertain and sell, but not necessarily to disseminate messages that are in their best interests. And then I think it's really useful, excuse me, for them to understand how images are constructed and how we process them, to be able to sometimes step back and divorce the music, for example, from the music video, so it becomes easier to look at just the images, and to simply ask critically minded questions like, does that reflect reality? In whose interest is it that I buy into that version of reality? Those kinds of questions.
When we did the piece of communication that was called Evolution, which I don't know how familiar everyone listening is with that, but what it showed was what it took to turn a fairly attractive but very regular looking woman into a billboard model. We literally went through the entire process and filmed it and sped it up, and its purpose was to deconstruct what happens, to educate, to inform, to make available something that explains the way things go. And I think that's been very effective, and I think education ultimately is the answer to all of this stuff, and a level of transparency that neither advertisers nor magazine folks nor designer nor television commercials are generally in the business of doing. So in schools, media literacy is really important. I believe that beauty literacy is also very important because, as I say, I think it should be fun, not make you miserable. And if you understand what's true and what's not, if we show our kids what's true and what's not, then they have the tools to make their own decisions.
I want to briefly comment on this as well, that there's some interesting research showing that a very effective way of protecting young women from the thin media is to use a little bit of a stress inoculation approach. In this case, it's a media inoculation approach, where women generate their own analysis and their own criticism of the media. And it appears that when women, and even very young women, take a more active role in generating their own critical point of view about the media, this can be really quite effective in protecting them.
Thank you, all of you, for those responses. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. Again, thank you for attending, and a thank you to Sherry Graydon, Janet Keston, and Jose Jerry for being here with us today. I'd also like to remind you to please visit NETIC's website at the end of this presentation at www.netic.ca, and please sign the petition for their new awareness campaign targeted at the fashion and beauty industries. And of course, a thank you today to our hosts for this event, the National Eating Disorder Information Center and the Canadian Women's Health